Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Hexnode Live. So tonight, we'll be tackling yet another sector. We're going to be, in this case, two sectors: supply chain and logistics. So today, we're going to be having two sessions, and we are going to be starting off on the supply chain. So we're going to title this as "Mitigating Risks and Building Resilience." So, in an era defined by global trade and interconnectedness, the importance of robust and resilient supply chains cannot be overstated. So when the world becomes more reliant on efficient flow of goods and services, the requirement or the need for safeguarding these, critical lifelines becomes paramount. So today, we're here to address one of the most pressing challenges faced by the supply chain and logistics industry, which is security. So this event is going to serve as a platform so that we can, delve deep into the intricacies, technical intricacies, trends, and solutions aimed at fortifying supply chains against security threats and vulnerabilities. So in this session, joining us today is an esteemed lineup of speakers. I'm going to start off with Ms. Susan Farrell, who is the head of R&D commercialization at Object Security. She is a board member of Industrial Control System, Information Sharing Analysis, and various other committees. Thank you, Susan, for joining us. Next, we got Mr. Wolfgang Limacher. He is a former director, head of supply chain and transport industries for the World Economic Forum in New York and Geneva, former partner and trading managing director at strategy firm CVA in Hong Kong, and former president and CEO at GeoPost Intercontinental. Hello, Wolfgang. And next, we got Mr. Vincent Matozzo, who was the CEO and managing partner at Paradigm Venture Group LLC. Vincent here has expertise in just supply chain innovation as well as supply chain organizational development and business continuity. Vincent. And finally, we got Mr. Roman Zukov, who is a product security manager at Intel. So Roman's going to come at it from a more cybersecurity perspective for us. So he has experience in cybersecurity projects and technologies, as well as a vast knowledge of the cybersecurity world market, as well as knowledge and good knowledge in the compliance standards such as ISO 27001, among other standards. So yeah, these are our speakers. Thank you guys for joining us. And without further, I guess we can start off with the questions. All right, so my first question goes to Vincent. So Vincent, the global trend of digitization and the rapid transition to remote work, it's created an increased reliance on an organization's software supply chain. So as more operations are more digitalized or digitally controlled, how has the shift affected these operations? How has it affected supply chain operations? And what do you think are the challenges that comes along with this increasing digitization?
Sure. No, good morning, everyone. And that's a great question. I think, looking at it from a lot of perspectives, there could be some very interesting vantage points. A lot of it has to do with opportunity, and a lot will also have to do with implied risk. And I think both of those profiles are increasing dramatically. From a security perspective, the reliance and an organization's ability to have that software intent and digital transformation strategy in supply chain, and I think the organization as a whole. And then now with the world really focused on remote working, there's significant changes in supply chain operations, right? From multi-modalities happening in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, teams being remote. I really wanted to unpack just a couple of super brief high points on those operations, and that remote work has a dependence on the supply chain software technological stack predominantly in the cloud, so less of a physical operation, and that shift has negative and positive applications. So on the positive side, that digitalization has greater efficiency, right? Flexibility, one of my favorite concepts, interoperability and scalability in supply chain processes. There's a huge focus to find more dollars, more efficiency, more automation, and digitizing these workflows. Even as you think about meeting management, task management, data operation strategies, improving communication and productivity. I think there's a lot of organizations that have an intent. Recent surveys have said up to 70% of organizations are looking to leverage data analytics, things like AI and machine learning to optimize inventory management, demand forecasting, logistics planning. But that reliance on software also now introduces the security challenges, right? And that digital footprint. So as we rely on these systems, these software, these networks are now expansive outside of what would have been the 4 or the 16 walls of a facility. So we're more vulnerable to cyber threats and attacks on the software, on the ecosystems, on end-to-end connection points. So as the software supply chain attacks, there's vulnerabilities now, not only through your primary opportunities, but your partners. So Zoom, even on the meeting here today, we're using third-party video conferencing and software. So there's the opportunity to introduce malicious code or tamper with legitimate components, compromising things like data breaches, software supply chain disruptions, data poisoning. And organizations have to have integrity and security of the software, as well as much scalable penetration and evaluation processes from in-house and outside partner firms. That second piece is really the third-party risk. So those organizations rely on those vendors, right, for third party, and you're seeing a multi-million-dollar increase in cybersecurity threat awareness in the insurance sectors. So for organizations to perform the due diligence, that security posture, that competency, that demand, as well as the capacity to meet those contractual obligations. Legacy systems, every 6 months, there's constant updates, there's opportunities and things that are happening. So legacy systems and operations that are out there might not have been designed originally with some of these robust security measures. And some of those technologies can be a significant challenge for end-to-end encryption. So that planning, risk assessment, and security controls to protect that are important. And then really the last 2 pieces are the employee awareness and training, right? 70% of most organizations experienced a digital breach, and it was due to human vulnerability, right? We've all seen those fishy emails, phishing, spam attacks, right? Opening attachments, inserting unapproved memory media into organizations. And also now the use of employee personal devices has really made that a very complex ecosystem. So that awareness, that company policy and training to mitigate the human-related risks and build a security conscious culture is important. And then last, the regulatory compliance environment and landscape is changing very, very, very fastly with AI guarded and machine learning rules, regulations, and data sets. Even organizations that were allowing employees to use things like ChatGPT and generative AI, having those general data protection regulations. So I'll kind of stop right there, but I think, in summary, organizations need to prioritize a different approach to supply chain security, have an assessment plan for those risks, both internally and externally, with their software and their ecosystems, and constantly implement and have an agile approach to fostering that culture of security awareness.
I agree with you a lot on especially the human aspect, because this is not just something that affects supply chains. It's a universal thing, right? In every organization. So the culture, and it's something that's not, at least what we've seen, is not moving as fast as we want it to, in terms of being a more security conscious culture. So, I kind of agree on that. So thank you for that answer, Vincent. So my next question to Roman. So malicious actors are they're exploiting the complexities and interconnectedness of the modern supply chain ecosystem, right? So recently we had the SolarWinds supply chain attack, huge attack. So it kind of highlighted how vulnerable the supply chain industry were to cyber attacks. So in order to kind of keep pace with the evolving threat landscape, with these these malicious actors becoming more, let's say, sophisticated, a new approach is needed, right? So what measures should enterprises take in order to ensure privacy and security in their supply chain, and how do they build an effective risk mitigation strategy?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Good day, everybody. That's a really great question, and I'm glad that Wayne briefly mentions that awareness and culture is a crucial topic for mitigating that risk. I was about to say that first of all, I would recommend to clearly communicate what software supply chain risks means to managers and to those executives and company leaders, and also to all employees, of course. Because often the case, it's perceived like something as technology specifics, you know, for geeks or only for tech-oriented companies. Why should we care? But the answer is almost all companies consume and somehow reuse software, right? It's obvious because software is an essential part of literally each single operation, I think, of today's companies. No matter of your core business is about manufacturing, service, food, transport, telecom, whatever. Now, where's the risk? The risk is actually connected to the question how you would handle yet another software update or the new software from the supplier package, executable or whatever, you presumably even automatically get from your vendors, right? From the portal or from the open source repo, how to make sure it's not poisoned or the link you used is not tampered, for example, or you actually can trust that supplier and that source. So this is really essential to communicate where the risk. Now, after the better communication and understanding where security could be compromised in company's supply chain, let's briefly talk how to tackle this risk. My first advice would be, I often would give this advice, do what majority in industry does. I think it could be a little bit different from the statement like follow the leaders, right? Follow those standards. Because if you're not giants or technology is not your main business, it could be tricky sometimes, right? To implement all measures, all controls, all tools. It's very much expensive. And especially when you start your journey to secure your software supply chains, it's worth to take a look at the standards and best practices, of course. First, I would mention NIST's cybersecurity supply chain risk framework and publications, built-in security and maturity model. This is kind of for strategic overview, just to give you an idea or direction to the overall supply chain program, how to run it, what resources do you need, what milestones you need to achieve in order to mitigate that risks, and so on. If you're asking for more like a technical directions, it could be secure supply chain consumption framework, CNCF, Cloud Native Foundation, secure software recommendations, and also a lot of regulators like European regulators, ENISA, NIST in the US, and all over the world publish their short and concise guidance and papers how to start with these mitigations for risk for software supply chains. To switch a little bit to the more like a practical advice here. For example, of course, Intel as one of the industry leading supplier takes this topic very seriously. We have an experience over the years, there is no doubt. And I believe we coined the term like compute lifecycle assurance. That means a process we follow day to day to make sure we bake in trust from the components we are ingesting on the one hand, along the whole development chain, and to products actually we are building. That's said, you can find a lot of free white papers highlighting best practices, including secure developments, practices, threats, mitigations, and so on. It's all free, not for advertising, but you can easily find it at the intel.com website. To summarize, what I would recommend to all enterprises, right? As you asked me about enterprises, to all enterprises in order to build risk mitigation strategy. First, understand where the risk could be or come from, so that to have right people at the table, make these decisions, make these directions, and to give everybody an idea or awareness that we should tackle that risk. This is really essential. Second, outline the scope. of the risks and threats you're going to mitigate. For example, there are around 10 common software supply chain risks. Let's say you take 5 out of 10 and start go this direction. It's again really important to outline the scope. Probably it's not feasible for each single company to handle all the risks. First, understand what's really important for you based on what you're consuming, who are your partners, do you ingest open source or not, so on. And finally, register and verify both proprietary suppliers and open source suppliers using workflow or checklists. I call it trust checklist or verification framework. It could be different term. Consume components that majority uses and actively maintain it and well known. And finally, includes this strategy, this verification, this trust checking strategy into your disaster recovery and business continuity plans. The last is very important. Often the case I see a company forgets about that. Probably almost everybody has their business continuity plans, but ask yourself whether software supply chain risks actually are included to these plans, and it would be the good indicator where we are to handle these risks.
All right, Roman, thank you very much for that. I think the next question goes to Susan, and I think this question is more up your alley. So, the surging the cybersecurity threat landscape, it's kind of demonstrated that operational and production disruption is very much possible. So, cybersecurity attacks, they've come very close to impacting operational technology as well as, ICS, industrial control systems, right? So when it comes to attacking ICS networks, there's been an increase in like public and non-public ransomware events affecting these ICS environments. So what preventive measures can we take to avoid, this scenario for enterprises?
Thank you so much for that question. And I think you touched on it. It's really interesting. We've always traditionally thought about cybersecurity on the IT side, right? But when you talk about supply chain and logistics, that needs to have an equal attention on the operational side. When you look at OT ICS cyber attacks, you're looking at an attacker going in and actually impacting production. So that's one of the things that they're trying to accomplish is, how can I shut down oil and gas going through a pipeline? How can I shut down the delivery of electricity to the community? How can I impact the production of pharmaceuticals so that you have to throw out an entire batch of food or pharmaceutical manufacturing? So that's what the cyber attacker is trying to accomplish, and in worse situations actually cause explosions or or worse. Prevention can fall into a lot of different areas. As Roman and Vincent have already talked about compliance, I am actively involved in the International Society of Automation initiatives with MITRE and NIST. And the compliance falls into the ISA IEC 62443 standards, as well as NIST 853 and 882. So those who are interested in prevention, do look into those compliance frameworks. When you drill down into the NIST cyber framework, they really break it down into identifying the cyber risk, proactively protecting and detecting cyber opportunities, and then responding. So from an identification standpoint, we've been very active in working with the International Society of Certified ISALs. ISALs are information sharing associations. So you look at municipalities, smart cities, where they're working together to share information where there are vulnerabilities or weaknesses in their supply chain. Another opportunity, and we work closely with DARPA and Office Naval of Research in proactively looking at the software from the OT perspective. And like Roman mentioned, that software sits at the device level. So you're really kind of looking at industrial software code in devices. So the controllers that control the flow through the pipeline or the delivery of that electricity. And if you proactively look at that industrial software code for weaknesses that that hackers can seek, then you kind of game over for the hackers, right? And it really, that can be done in minutes or hours. It doesn't take a lot of effort to scan that industrial software code. I think Roman also mentioned the download of patches and updates to devices. You don't have to trust that code for patch management before you install it. You can run scans on that code looking for vulnerabilities and weaknesses. You can also, these information sharing associations are doing vulnerability scans, looking for alerts. And as soon as those alerts are discovered, can push them to security operations centers, SIMs and SOARs, so that they can be diverted. The other thing is using artificial intelligence and machine learning. You know, a lot of that has been in the news lately, but if you combine artificial intelligence and machine learning with novel approaches to code scans, we can do symbolic pen testing on OTICS devices outside of it being in production. And then continuous monitoring is important. Most importantly, when it comes to protection, is looking at access control. You know, who has access to the IT systems, who has access to the industrial control systems, even access to the computers that are running the robotics on the supply chain. And then interfacing with development security operations. And if you're looking at prevention, we're also very much involved with an initiative called ICS for ICS, which is OT incidents training, so that you can be prepared if you are attacked and how you respond to that. It is a free program. Available internationally. In fact, just did one in Aberdeen. So definitely encourage everybody to get their certifications through ICS for ICS.
All right, thank you for that, Susan. And before we move on to the next question, if any of our viewers have any questions, please please put them in our, I think we're LinkedIn live right now, so please pose your questions on LinkedIn, and if anyone wants to jump in and if there's any questions, we'll answer them as we go on. So yeah, next question, going back to Vincent. So now earlier, threat actors were impersonating as CEOs in order to attempt kind of like a business email compromise attacks, right? So now they're moving away from that and instead focusing on impersonating third parties. So that's where we're giving rise to financial supply chain compromise. Now the question here would be, how do these threat actors use impersonation and account compromise to kind of run stuff like invoice fraud, age report fraud, blind party threat attacks? Because we got they've shifted tactics. And why have they shifted these tactics, and what do they need to know? And finally, the final question is, how would these attacks affect the effective functioning of an enterprise's supply chain?
Sure. No, some great questions. And, it keeps a lot of security professionals up at night and probably a lot of nefarious individuals up at night as well. I think the threat actors that engage and all, as you've kind of framed, financial supply chain compromise, right? And, Susan, I think, gave a great overview of the potential impact. Impersonation's one of the oldest, kind of activities in fraud. And that account compromise have various tactics around fraud, aging report fraud, blind third-party attacks, right? And understanding the tactics and the trends, to your point, as the mentality and opportunity shift is super important to defend against these threats. And I think some of the key trends and things that we're seeing, we're going to try to unpack in a couple of high-level buckets. One is impersonation, right? So previously and still currently, some of these actors were impersonating third-party vendors, suppliers, service providers, right? There's many easy ways to access lists of information online and target individuals that might be in shipping or logistics for things that look like a FedEx, a UPS, or third-party freight, delivery notification. And in those notifications, by putting something that looks like a tracking number or shipping ID, enough information that looks plausibly feasible, you're getting unsuspected, busy, or distracted parties to click on those links or to carry out an action. A lot of times email would be compromised, from a CEO or a predominant financial controller, authorizing pending payments and things like that. But you're seeing the rise of fraudulent emails and even websites. So, attackers fraudulently looking at pay companies like PayPal or Venmo and literally sending out emails with copied images and GIFs. Obviously, with AI and image scraping software and the rise of technology, it's been very easy to impersonate, logos and information, especially with AI image generation today. So impersonation has definitely evolved. And
that's a big problem right now.
Yep. And they're looking at meticulously crafting these messages, right? So they look at how a major bank or financial institution, Amazon, PayPal, right, has these mass communications to appear legitimate and deceive employees. And I think, feigning that general interaction is key. So that vigilance of looking for things that may be out of place. A big trick is really looking at the header of a received or secure email, right? A lot of organizations are upping the security to whether or not it's an inbound or outbound message from the organization, and having software and services that sit on top of email regulating those, inbound and outbound opportunities. That account compromise then, is where the actors would gain access, typically through email or a password impersonation or reset. A lot of times personally available information is enough to reset security credentials, a name, an address, some key security question information. And, there's various methods, including the phishing attacks, the credential theft, or exploiting some of those vulnerabilities. But once that account is compromised, that really impacts, as we've talked about, functioning on the enterprise supply chain operations. Predominantly, primary and internal partners, right? Distributors, group purchasing organizations, vendors, manufacturers, all have that vulnerability. And it's easy because of the mass communication to copy or get a email template, right? Or something that looks like a template that could have occurred. Invoice fraud is still extremely big, especially in today's digital industry where invoices are being emailed, right, to general mailboxes, right? So a lot of organizations, it was up 27% last year for organizations that received inappropriate invoices sent to purchasing or financial mailboxes, right? Whether it's a PO box or a digital email account, those invoices appear genuine, sometimes having legitimate suppliers with payment information or remit to addresses whitewashed and then ultimately replaced. And a big piece as the digital footprint's getting more and more complex is aging report fraud. So manipulating aging reports, right? Tracking outstanding payments or receivables due to third-party compromised systems or software, creating that sense of urgency and leveraging, again, the human condition to exploit vulnerabilities, threatening a credit hold or an interruption in service, requiring immediate action. A big one, too, is the blind third-party attacks, right? So fraudulent emails or requests by impersonating vendors or service providers, sometimes even patients, to gain information and do reversals. And those attacks rely on generic requests, sensitive information, or poor credential management policies, targeting employees that are either new or particularly wouldn't have business knowledge, of a particular set of an application. So I think you're seeing that shift in tactics becoming more intentional and personalized and even devious, right? By intentionally misrepresenting versus trying to exploit. And so again, the human factor is huge, but being vigilant in detecting that internal personalization, constantly switching up and encrypting software, and then training staff and having automated workflows, right, that work through and do a lot of detection. The last piece is these third-party software vendors, security hardening firms, and even virtual assistants now are out there offering various services, training, education, and that really needs to be an important and directed step in your ecosystem strategy, how you're controlling those communication and endpoints and authorization and access, RSA tokens, so on and so forth, being more and more important.
All right, thank you, Vincent. I think we move on to Wolfgang. So Wolfgang, so the supply chain visibility, it allows organizations to identify areas in the supply chain that cause delays or unnecessary expenditure, so which improves production efficiency. So especially coming to software supply chain, maintaining visibility through device management and security is crucial. So the question here being, how can supply chain management systems be more flexible? How can improve visibility, and how does a device management software aid this process?
Yeah, thanks for the question on visibility. It's very close to my heart. I take the device question first because we talked a lot about vulnerability, and I think Susan made the point. Devices are a very vulnerable point in our whole system. So we are facing the challenge that on the one hand, we want connectivity and visibility and a lot of devices that tell us what is happening, but these devices are doors for viruses, and the connectivity let these viruses go through the entire organism and the entire supply chain. And that doesn't stay with one company, it affects a lot of companies. Let's say large supply chains have thousands of actors, so the risk is enormous. When we come to device management software, it generates also data. It gives you the visibility on devices. It allows to reduce the risk that people do their updates themselves. You can run them centrally, remotely, at once. So that's definitely very efficient and comes at lower risk. Yeah, it's one piece of the puzzle of visibility, which is so important for supply chain managers. I always say, okay, if we have some fire doors, that's fine. Maybe we need this to protect the organism, and maybe it's only the leg or the arm which is affected and not the heart and the brain. But in general, I'm promoting and advocating visibility and the whole maze of data. And this brings me to a point which I would like to make, is that we need to find a more inclusive and conscious approach to digitalization. And what I mean with this is that we have to collectively work on creating this connectivity and also dealing with the downsides of it. And that means that we need to collaborate. And those people who are better connected, who have better information, are also more resilient because they learn from others where problems occur. So that's also a kind of visibility and a kind of, as a measure to be more resilient. And the issue we are having currently, there's still not enough adoption of technology, whether it is on the visibility side nor on the cybersecurity side. So we need more digitalization, and we need to drive it, as I said, collectively. I'm involved in a project that does this. This is a project led by RISE, the Research Institutes of Sweden, and A-STAR, which is the research institute in Singapore. And the geography shows already that it is about digitalization of corridors, and means also cybersecurity of corridors and not of companies. And so we need to let data flow, we need to let information flow, we need to let knowledge flow. And this sounds very easy, but who knows the logistics and the supply chain industry knows as well that this is not a given. So we need to find new ways. And I think due to COVID and what we have experienced as a consequence of the measures against COVID, as well as the consequences of man-made climate change, I think there is more openness and willingness to try new ways. And the project I mentioned, which is called the Virtual Watchtower, the VWT, and the Watchtower already shows that you look for opportunities and problems, better routes and dangerous routes, maybe not to take. And to get this going, we bundle new elements, maybe not all new, but it comes as a bundle, the solution. There is no silver bullet. And this is maybe also a point to be made when we talk about supply chain security. There is no silver bullet. We need a lot of different elements. Yeah? And my fellow panelists have touched on a lot of this. So how do you get the data flow and the collaboration going? First, you have to focus on something relevant. So cybersecurity is relevant, so that should be part of the bundle. Second, you need a trusted and neutral body that brings the things together. And there are a lot of organizations which have been mentioned here. And here is another team that wants to bring things together. You need a community, so you need to have a purpose. You need to understand how communities work and put it together of respected partners. You need an architecture and middleware, so you need technology, you need data standards and message formats. We will put together legal instruments. I think the legal side, and which also documents the commitments of each party to protect the community in their own interest, is an important element, but it's also an instrument. So legal instruments can also help to pull data. And then there is governance, which is very important, and governance can also include the cybersecurity aspect. So for me, that's a very important element to say, okay, we have to find a more collaborative approach to digitalization and at the same time, cybersecurity.
And if I may jump in, I think, Wolfgang, you made a couple excellent points, many excellent points, sir. But to mitigate a lot of these impacts, and you're totally right, it's the old adage, it takes a village, right? It's that ecosystem. So organizations having strong security measures, regular communication. In today's day and age, to not have nodes or checks, right, for those regular assessments and robust authentication and verification processes is crucial, right? Those maintaining open lines of communication and vendors. And I think another thing that the pandemic and other disruptions have taught us is the diversification of suppliers and understanding that. And as much as that's a risk, relying on a single supplier, as we saw, right, the move from just in time to just in case inventory and supply chain, but having that flexibility and redundancy helps not only buffer against supply chain disruptions, but it also hardens the environment by having backup suppliers, redundant production facilities, redundant security protocols, and being able to adapt quickly. And I think when faced with those unexpected events or disruptions, having a lot of the partners in the ecosystem establishing standards, right? And if you think about how even, your digital marketplace has evolved, think about how you used a phone or a TV 15 years ago to today. We all consume programs and still make phone calls, but it's not the 1980s circa rotary phone, right, that you used, or the wide color tube television, right? Everything's more of an enterprise or a platform today, leveraging that technology of an ecosystem. So it takes that semantic layer of multiple channels, multiple apps on a common code that allows you to put your profile, your semantic layer, your visual, your credentials, your credit card, right, your payment terms in one place. And so you look at that, right, in consuming streaming media, and I think it's a great use case for security, right, in having various apps, to your point, in common terms and conditions, in common coding language, exist on an ecosystem governed by a third party. In that case, it's Apple or Google or Amazon, right, or even Netflix. But all those individual programs, networks, channels can symbiotically coexist, and it allows a stronger, I think, ultimately more collaborative environment. So great example, and I think it just relevantly hits home so impactfully today.
Great points, both of you. Thank you, thank you, Wolfgang, and thank you, Vincent. So yeah, I'll move on to the next question to Roman. So open source code, right? So the availability of open source code libraries and frameworks, it helps developers to save time. So it reduces the amount of code that needs to be written. However, this adds, several critical security vulnerabilities. For example, the security of the code itself, the security of the dependencies among the software, as well as the third-party libraries they're using. So how can these enterprise security teams bridge the gap between application security and product security to kind of reduce friction with developers, but still kind of shift right to ensure products are secure prior to the release?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before jumping into that question, a quick comment on the previous points. Wolfgang made a really great point about the enormousness of the supply chain, and also we on today's call we mentioned SolarWinds, right? It's a famous example, and I believe everybody wanted to take a shot with this company when we meet them on the conference. The actual company, it's a very famous case, but I would put on the table another case which happens, I believe, in April this year, when 3CX voice over IP company actually have been breached, and that case was named like a double supply chain attack, even double, because their customers, the users was attacked, was compromised, but the actual attack started from their supplier, from the company supplier. So it's stacked stuff, and yeah, we shouldn't underestimate the complexity of the supply chain and the risk therefore. Now, jumping to the open source, yes, that is true. Open source has become truly ubiquitous, and yeah, and to Susan's point, actually, we see a lot of software everywhere, even on each device, in each HD device, and we have especially open source, right? We have operation systems, databases, we have these IoT platforms, industrial platforms. There are some of them also open source, and this is really a big deal. A few examples. For example, Red Hat did a survey last year, I believe, that's highlighted that nearly 89% of IT leaders in the poll believe that enterprise open source is as secure or even more secure than proprietary one. So this is a big stake from the whole world to the open source. The recent report by the famous cybersecurity firm Synopsys shows that there's a large increase in high-risk vulnerabilities over the 5 years. For example, 5 times multiplied in retail and e-commerce, 3 times more in hardware and tools, and 2x more in manufacturing, industrial, transport, logistics. It's increasing, it's evolving. And on the other hand, the interesting statistic that's nearly 90% of code base contains open source, more than 4 years out of date. you could imagine the problem, right? And look, that's where open source topic become slightly different from, let's say, traditional cybersecurity, because more and less we have regulations or at least standards that could be mandatory to some sectors or not, but still we have something in traditional cybersecurity. But open source provides more flexibility to companies, to developers, to IT teams, right? And it has less control by definition. Now, what I would suggest to companies, IT teams and security teams, first of all, I think this is the really important stuff. First of all, establish and embrace partnership between IT and development teams and security teams. It's really essential because centralized security teams inside the organization can't endlessly scale their resources, addressing ever increasing attacks, including, of course, software supply chain attacks, and those risks come from open source. We often talk about vetting these open source libraries, scans, right, for vulnerabilities, gating in the development processes, policies, and etc. But security controls and tools alone are not able to fully restrain threats, mitigate risks, and that's even more true for supply chain attacks, actually, related to open source. That is why it's crucial to cultivate security first mindset, that we call this term, again, about awareness, about engagement that enables especially developers, QA, I mean, testing, verification engineers, and other technical roles to understand the benefits of integrating security practices, including handling open sources, right, into the daily routine. And moreover, it makes security a personal value for this person. Again, this is very important because often the case we forget about these kind of technical persons that are more like flexible, and we should also work with them. Secondly, automation and these DevSecOps practices is a big friend, of course, of you. Shift and left, and so on. But remember that you should inject security smart to the development practices, to the DevOps practices. For example, use the common familiar tools first, including everything, for example, you have right now inside your DevOps or CI/CD pipeline. Use nature tools, use nature technologies, like JSON, YAMLs, automation, like everything as a code right now. And security team should admit it, should understand it, and should integrate, again, security practices and even policies smart to their development pipelines and development practices. What else? Know exactly what software you consume. It's really important when it comes to open source. Then often the case when we once established trust, for example, with, I don't know, partner or open source repository, in this case, we forgot to double check. That's wrong. That's where things like SBOM, software bills of materials, come to play. That means each time we consume open source, for us, we should verify, we should build up the list of those dependencies. We should understand these dependencies. But I would suggest, especially for the first steps, don't dive deep, because it's a huge topic, and it is young topic. Make the direct dependency inventory first. Validate this list, these SBOMs. Things like provenance, signatures, where applicable, should also help. And if you build your own software, and I think it's often the case for not even for big companies, but for medium companies as well, because very much all the companies right now have their IT departments, and maybe at least 1, 2, or even more staffed software development divisions. So if you build your own software, know what you build, know what you consume, build these software bills of materials, check the health and quality. For SBOMs, just to close up this endless topic, examine CISA practices and types of SBOMs, US Agency for Cybersecurity, other requirements, tools like OpenSSF, for example, does the great tools like scorecards that also would help. And last but not least, automate updates cleverly. I'm really glad that Susan made that point, like updates should be done nearly every day, but it should be done cleverly, right? You always, of course, you should strive to use latest and greatest software with mitigated CVEs, those vulnerabilities, but you should define third-party updating policy and workflow. You should specify cadence. You should think about acceptance criteria. And by the way, don't hesitate to ask your supplier how they do these updates, how they handle their own dependencies, how they provide updates and mitigations to you, so that you can adopt your own cadence and your own practices. Think about acceptable risk versus reasonable resources versus quality and compatibility check, and try to incorporate intelligence data sources like exploitability, for example, score. We have those databases like CISA known exploited vulnerabilities that stands the special curated list of vulnerabilities that are known to be exploited in the wild, because some surveys shows that even only few percent of the overall vulnerabilities in open source are actually exploited in the wild. So these catalogs could help you to narrow the focus, to prioritize, to reduce the noise, prioritize what really matters, and subsequently better plan team resources, because resources is a really important topic when it comes to all the security and mitigations and all other practices. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that, Roman. So this next question is for Susan, but it's kind of like the flavor of the month. It's concerning AI. So if anyone wants to jump in, stoke the fire, keep the conversation going, feel free. So yeah, Susan. So at least this is a survey by Gartner. So according to Gartner, supply chain organizations expect the level of machine automation in their supply chain process to double, like in the next 5 years. So that's one kind of stat. So this is kind of a two-parter. So about automation, what impact does AI have on supply chain operations? And continuing on, it's the potential of AI in all this supply chain is undisputed. It's huge. So to say that the path to become AI powered without challenges would kind of be a lie. So what would be the major challenges that enterprise organizations would face while benefiting from AI automation?
So I love this question. So yeah, there's many different prongs to this. So we too are seeing a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning used to detect anomalies in supply chain logistics, automation, etc. But we're not at a point where we can just press the button, the easy button, and walk away and expect that these AI-driven tools and platforms are going to remediate all risk, because they can't. There's not enough data. Data is required to build machine learning models, to make artificial intelligence effective, and to also make sure that the outcome of artificial intelligence and machine learning can be trusted, which is one of the areas that we're working on. But it's important that these tools are used, but that they're operator driven. So when the anomaly or issue is brought up, or the efficiencies are recognized, that there's still humans involved in triggering the response to that. So that's one thing that I did want to bring up. The other, and I think Vincent and I were having this conversation prior to this panel, is the issue with dirty data being fed into supply chain platforms. It's a huge problem because you have legacy data. Maybe the data was written or it was digitized, or it doesn't fully represent the information that is needed to make decisions. So artificial intelligence and machine learning is being utilized to clean this data so that you get a better view, a better total asset visibility into the supply chain. You can also make decisions based off of product lifecycle management. For instance, if you have a part that you bought and you have a similar part that you bought that's running your manufacturing, for instance, then you can make better decisions on what was the life cycle expectation, how much maintenance and repair did it take to support that part. So artificial intelligence and machine learning is contributing to that, as well as policy automation. We've talked policy, right? And it's a huge tarball of an issue to manage these policies. But if you can automate it in a sense that once you find these anomalies or issues in your supply chain, and then you can automate the policy. For instance, you detect bad actor behavior on your network. You can then fence the devices that are affected. That all can be done with artificial intelligence and machine learning. But just let machine learning models learn over time. Clean data being fed into those machine learning models are very, very important. The other thing that we've developed is confidence scoring of the artificial intelligence and machine learning. There's always, well, you can take it with a grain of salt, right? Because how much can you trust what the artificial intelligence is telling you? But if you can develop confidence scoring that tells you whether or not you're getting false negatives or false positives, then you're closer to making a better decision based off of that. So hopefully that gives you a little bit better briefing on some of the advantages and challenges and how you can take advantage of artificial intelligence and machine learning today and keeping an eye on it for the future.
Yeah, if I may make a comment, I hear a lot of data in IT. I'm a super fan of technology, but at the end, we cannot delegate to the machines. And I think I heard that also from Vince and from you, Susan. It is too much of a holistic problem. And if I want to point out one issue with artificial intelligence, we also should not follow the flavor of the day, how you said it, and lose sight of the complexity and the dimensions, the multiple dimension. This is a top responsibility. It's a board responsibility, a collective responsibility, and the machines are just our tools so that we can live up to that responsibility.
I agree. I think it's a raw material for supply chain directors understanding that, right? That it can transform a supply chain, but just like anything, unharnessed, unfiltered, unregulated, unguardrailed, right? For lack of a real word, the momentum is there, but there needs to be guardrails, and it needs to also fit the vision, mission, and values of the organization. whether it's inventory management, supply chain forecasting, operational efficiency. There's a big push around this generative AI, but it can analyze the data, the market trends, the factors. But exactly that, Wolfgang and Susan, you've nailed it. There's ethical considerations, there's data poisoning, there's cleanliness, there's privacy in any continuous improvement process. And again, I think Wolfgang, you nailed it right. You need to look at the tide and the breadth and depth and the dimensions and make sure that it's appropriately guided ethically, without bias, and with proper guardrail.
All right, thank you guys for your answers. I think we're a little pressed for time, but I think we got time for one more question, and that would be to Wolfgang. I think you're going to like this one. So, okay, so here it is. So the complexity and interconnected nature of today's supply chain makes them more vulnerable to severe impacts from disruptions. Like you got minor incidents like shipping delays, or to like huge serious interruptions like a cyber attack, just like the one we were just a while back. So in response to such disruptions, supply chain resilience has become a priority for enterprises. But to manage this priority, they need to get better at collaboration. I think you mentioned collaboration just a while back. So how can they achieve this, and how does the effective collaborative relationships among supply chain partners affect operational efficiency, cost savings, and customer satisfaction?
Yeah, it is really the holy grail, right? Because I'm a strong believer that we need the symbiosis of digitalization and collaboration. And so to get the whole thing going, and we all know that we have some sand in the digitalization engine, to get the whole thing going, we need both. And I'm convinced that there will be no large-scale digitalization without collaboration, and there will be no large-scale collaboration without digitalization. Because at the magnitude we're having in front of us when we speak about supply chains, we need digitalization, and digitalization across the chains, and that means we need collaboration to make that work. So this is a very important point I want to make. If you think about how to extract value, you need to think about multiple levels. And one level is the business. So you can have a business perspective, and we have spoken about a lot about how companies can protect themselves. But we have also an industry dimension. So you can collaborate to make the industry better. And I still believe this is not enough. You have also to think about the ecosystem. So this means interrelated, interdependent value chains, and how they need to be aligned and optimized to extract value. And again, this can only work with digitalization. And when you look at these three layers or types of scope of collaboration to create value, you also realize quickly that you need different stakeholders to extract that value, whether it's efficiencies, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it is sustainability. And you have three types of partnerships. The one is a vertical partnership, which is the traditional collaboration along supply chains. And this is pretty easy, but has to be refocused, I think, and made much stronger and orient much stronger towards the digitalization and security. Then you have horizontal collaboration. And this means between peers. I think when we speak about security, it shouldn't matter with whom I'm dealing, right? If there is a risk, I should share that. And I should share it with my competitor because it may backfire. And if I do this, then the competitor gives information to me, which is relevant for my cybersecurity. And then when we look about the ecosystem, we need to think about actors in other industries. We need to think about governments. We need to think about international organization. And this means we build an ecosystem-based network that helps us to, for example, extract the value of higher resilience collectively. There is no, I think there is a very high risk if we do this on the individual level that we will be hit anyway because of the increasing connectivity. So I'm speaking a lot about this pair of digitalization and collaboration, but I truly believe this is a discussion which should be intensified and better understood what the potential of this is to extract whatever kind of value.
Thank you for that answer, Wolfgang. And I agree, actually, this is a collaboration. I think there needs to be more dialogue based on that. And I think we've had a lot of dialogue, but again, we need to have much more. And I think that's our time for this panel. And before you guys leave, I would like to thank all of you, Susan, Roman, Wolfgang, as well as Vincent, who had to step out, for taking the time out of their busy schedules and having such a very informative, very engaging session. So thank you, all of you, for attending this panel.
Thank you for inviting us. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Thanks for the
Okay,
invitation. Thanks for the discussion.
Yes, it's our pleasure.
great discussion. Have a nice day, everybody.
All right, you too. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Have a nice day. So, guys, that would be the end of the first panel session on supply chain. So now let's move on to the next session, which kind of emphasizes the importance of security in the logistics industry. So a little introduction. So in today's interconnected world, I've said that word a lot today. So yeah, in today's interconnected world, the goods are where goods are kind of transported across vast networks, ensuring security in the logistics industry, just as I said in the previous panel, is also paramount. So in this case, also the importance of endpoints and their management. So endpoint security and management tools simplify the work by streamlining and automating the process, safeguarding the integrity of the logistics sector. So joining me in an exclusive interview session is Rachel White, who is the founder and CEO of Next Level Information Limited. So Rachel has over 30 years of experience covering global cargo supply chains, logistics, shipping, including ports and land transport. She was previously the Secretary General of the Port Equipment Manufacturers Association, and she also headed up the secretariat team for the ICHCA International, which is the Global Cargo Handling Association. As well as that, she's also a renowned writer, editor, conference producer, event moderator, influencer, and ambassador. That's quite a resume, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for the invite. And it's a pleasure to be here. And yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever this finds you. Thank you again to the panel members from the last session. Lots of food for thought. And I think you'll find I have some of the exact same phrases in my comments I've prepared for today. But just a caveat, yes, I've been really fortunate to work in logistics and transport for a long time in lots of different roles. I'm not a security expert, a cybersecurity expert, but I've been an observer of the industry and been lucky to meet a lot of people, hear a lot of experts talk. So hopefully today I can bring some of those threads together to share some insights for the audience, which I can see is quite varied. There's folk from the logistics sector, the supply chain side, and the technology side. So yeah, I'm happy and hope I can add some value with some insights and maybe some use cases and stories to illustrate some of the challenges that are being faced.
Oh yes, that's what we're here for, and we're sure you have a lot to, lot to give to the audience. So we'll start.
Yes. So are you asking the first question as we discussed regarding logistics? Should I talk a little bit about the logistics landscape today?
I'll start with the question and we'll kind of move forward from there. How's that?
Yes, I'm at your disposal.
Yes, definitely. All right. So the the way we're going to frame the questions is I'm going to be talking, I'm going to be explaining a bit for the audience in case there is a layman here and there. So it's going to be a bit of a lengthy question, but bear with me. So logistics is an integral component of the supply chain. So it basically plays a vital role in the efficient movement and management of goods from point A to point B. So, you got transportation, warehousing, inventory management, and order fulfillment. Now, Rachel, so in this, how can logistics companies ensure seamless coordination and collaboration among different stakeholders involved in the supply chain to kind of optimize the movement and delivery of goods?
Well, thank you for the question. Echoing speakers from, on the supply chain side, and, logistics came up from Wolfgang and others. Global logistics is incredibly complex today, and it's getting more complex. So, if you look at the logistics industry today, we're looking at complexity and volatility for planning and execution. And especially, as I think speakers in the last panel mentioned, we're seeing a lot of challenges around coordinating, managing physical transport, handling and distribution. We all saw that during the pandemic, had this tsunami of congestion, backlogs, displacement of goods, very volatile and difficult to manage. So the challenge, and we'll speak about it more, I think, is, what the world woke up to during the pandemic, how important logistics is, how important cargo movement is. But when the world wakes up, that includes criminals, hackers, and other malicious actors. So the risks have grown. And we talked about, logistics make things move from A to B, but in the reality of the world today, for cross-border and global movements, it's more like A to F via X, Y, and Z, and possibly some other, because things change very fast. And adaptability has actually always been a feature of the logistics sector. It's not always come easy though, and it still doesn't. So you've got all these handoffs from first to last mile. You've got across multiple countries, multiple transport modes, ocean, air, railroad, inland waterway, and nodes. You've got the ports, the inland ports and distribution centres, the warehousing. So there's a huge number of actors involved, and that's not including the fact that the industry logistics side deals with a vast amount of processes, paperwork, and regulatory processes. I think it was one of the big shipping lines did a survey a few years ago and worked out that getting a shipment of, I can't remember which fresh produce from, I think it was from India to Europe, took about 90 different processes. Unfortunately, the industry,
it's a very complicated process.
It's very complicated, and my specialist area that I work on at the moment is cold chain. And when it comes to movement of fresh produce, also, and food, also very important during the pandemic, and medicines, it gets even more complex because it's temperature controlled. And a lot of this stuff today is still paper-based. We're only just getting online with e-bills of lading for shipping, and that's one of the oldest, transport logistics documents in the world. We're also seeing, and this is just for context for those who might not be in that world today, we're seeing added complexity because the logistics landscape is changing. So I just wanted to explain that traditionally, you were a logistics provider, you were a 3PL or 4PL, or you were a port operator, or you were a shipping line, or you were a warehouse or cold store operator. You can't put people in those boxes anymore because a lot of people are morphing along the supply chain and they're looking to become logistics integrators. So it's that we're having a lot of M&A going on, and a lot of jockeying for position, and that's kind of, it's a good sign because it means that logistics and transport sectors really focusing in on serving the supply chain and individual customers. But equally, it brings its own complexities and competition as well. So a bit like Wolfgang and others, I'd say we need to talk not just about logistics companies and what they can do, but about logistics processes, connectivity, and ecosystems. And that logistics ecosystem fundamentally also involves the supply chain owner. And I've talked to a number of big shippers, as we call them, cargo owners, who recognized that in order to get the benefits of working with more digitally enabled logistics providers, they needed to do some homework too, and they needed to look at their internal structures and break down internal silos. So to your question, this seamless coordination and collaboration, it's not something that the logistics sector can do on its own, as was discussed in the last segment. It's
collaboration.
It's going to require a lot of collaboration. And, it's been, I think Wolfgang called it, as I have many times, the Holy Grail, for a long time. And lots of logistics companies, wherever they come from or wherever they're morphing from, are trying to do that today. Technology will enable great progress to be made in that area. But technology itself is not the answer. So I'd say what logistics companies are doing and need to do today is, you can't do it on your own. It's just too big. So this issue of walking a mile in other shoes, I think, is important for all the stakeholders to understand, where they're coming from and their issues. And for logistics companies, both customers and suppliers have to be part of that process, that consultation, to understand, what are the issues the others are facing, rather than trying to impose, one's own view. I think, they are also, and you are seeing this happening, really revamping their own internal processes. Definitely technology must be grasped, and it is growing exponentially at a rate I've never ever seen in this industry, partly due to the pandemic. And that curiosity and openness, and we're seeing startups coming into the business as well as disruptors. So all of that has to happen, but the caveat would be not to assume that just buying some new tech, not to denigrate anybody, but we do see it happening on, is going to just get a magic result. As one of the speakers at one of my conferences a few years ago said, an automated or digitalized bad process is still a bad process. There's just less people involved. So there's that whole, and that could get bigger in today's connected economy. So it's an interesting, it's an interesting time, and a time of great change and uncertainty on just about every level you can think of.
But in a way, you could also say it's a time of experimentation. So it's kind of like,
Absolutely. It's also, with that comes a lot of opportunities to change. And as Wolfgang said, to look at developing new revenue and value models that didn't exist before.
All right. Thank you for that answer, Susan. So I'll move on to the next question. All right. So cloud-based SaaS solutions enable logistics companies to access, real-time data to streamline operations, enhance collaboration. You said that a lot today. To enhance collaboration with supply chain partners, and as well as improve the overall efficiency and responsiveness in a cost-efficient manner. So effective manner. Sorry. So how far along do you think, or how far along is cloud adoption in the logistics industry, and how do they secure the cloud-based data transmission and storage?
Well, I'd have to say welcome to a bit of the new Wild West, because there's lots of cloud going on all over the place, both from traditional players, incumbents, if you like, but also from newcomers. We have digital-only platforms that have sort of aggregated data and become marketplaces. We have many companies moving into the cloud. I don't have the stats, because I've been looking around for those, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But might be preaching to the converted, but the cloud computing generally, has got lots of benefits. The access to information, scalability, reconfigurability, ability to scale up, all of that, without taking on a heavy internal IT infrastructure. When it comes to logistics, you've got a lot of opportunities there, because agility, resilience, connectivity, the ability to reach out. So it's definitely, in this global sector, escalating. But, it is a big part of the future for supply chain and logistics. as I said, it's hard to find data specifically on the logistics sector because it tends to get subsumed into supply chain, and supply chain and logistics tend to be talked about like one unit. Whilst they're related, they do have their different complexities. But if you look at, say, Accenture, they did a survey last year of supply chain managers, and about 1,000 or so, and 21% of the execs, they said they've already deployed cloud capabilities. I think maybe it might be a bit lower in logistics, but as I said, unfortunately, I don't have a hard stat to give you. I just know there's a heck of a lot going on. But there are risks and challenges that aren't yet overcome, which will come to our bit on security. One of the issues is both a risk and a challenge. It's the proliferation platforms. Like I said, a bit Wild West. And here I'm going to echo Wolfgang. There's no silver bullet. So, we're going to see a lot of platforms and systems of systems that need interconnectivity. And that's where cloud will help because of the open source and the integration abilities. So it's not going away. But within that, as other speakers said, for the logistics sector, interfacing with their customers, the supply chain owners and the cargo owners, we're going to have to look at issues of standardization, both on granular levels around specific issues and on a broader level. As of yet, I'd say the logistics industry would say we haven't figured this all out. It's probably the biggest transformation, of our lifetime, to fuse the digital and the physical, which is what you need to do in logistics, where you're moving a lot of stuff and you own a lot of stuff, and you've got a lot of ships and trucks and trains and port infrastructure. So I'd say it's a work in progress. Standardization, security, cross-platform connectivity are all, big issues. And regarding security, we have a way to go, as the last speakers mentioned. There are, of course, when it comes to cloud, protocols and regulations in place, but, the cyber risks are escalating. And we can talk about this in the next segment, but suffice to say, those who wish to do bad, they're clever too, so it's like don't underestimate them.
All right, on to the next question, and this is kind of pandemic, this is focusing on post-pandemic. So when the pandemic hit, everyone became very dependent on the online platforms for even basic needs, right? So the logistics industry must have also faced a lot of challenges. For example, you got increased order volumes, optimizing supply chain networks, ensuring timely deliveries, implementing safety protocols to protect the employees and customers. So how did this shift in consumerization affect the industry for good? So we saw unprecedented hikes in cybersecurity incidents during these times. And you couldn't do anything about that. But what is the security posture or status of the industry today? I think you were getting to that in the beginning. I think we're addressing that right now.
Yes. Well, I'd say you're quite right. I mean, I'm amazed the logistics industry and transport sector managed to get as much done as they did during the pandemic. The challenges were immense, from, as you said, the remote working shift, safety protocols for people on the ground, but also, as I think what was referenced by Wolfgang in the last session, the just ginormous disruption, nothing in the right place, volatility of supply and demand, adapting to change, needing to be agile, every step of the way, and really kind of a domino effect of global congestion when ships were stacked up outside the ports so they weren't somewhere else. So it was just a vast issue, and having listened to and heard from quite a lot, who were in the trenches, so to speak, during that time, it was hard, really hard. But naturally, what it did do is massively accelerate the appetite for digitalization within logistics. It's not a new theme for logistics at all and transport. They've been talking about it for years, but adoption was fairly slow, certainly compared to other sectors. There's quite a lot of traditional perspectives around in the industry, should I say, and quite a lot of concern about safety and security was there. So there was massive, definitely accelerated digitalization, and that genie is not going back in the bottle.
Since it was also sudden, I guess it was very hard to adapt at the time, right?
It was, but I mean, the logistics industry is remarkably resourceful. And it kind of has a level of inbuilt resilience, because, if you're shipping goods, and I think might as well measure, if you're shipping goods, halfway or all the way around the world, stuff's going to happen. Things are going to go wrong. There's going to be a storm, a port's going to be shut because there's been a wind surge. There are going to be rough conditions at sea, and the ship's going to arrive late, and that's going to muck up. So but lot of these are known, and that ability to shock has been kind of, that they say in financial terms, baked in to the system. What happened with the pandemic was the scale of shock after shock after shock, and the ripple effect globally just became too big for anybody to set it back on course, so without a lot of time. But what I would say is, because of the scale of global logistics today, what we are definitely seeing is that digitalization, it wasn't just about helping people work digitally or remotely. It was about getting a better handle on what was going on, where things were, and getting better information to keep supply chains and trade flowing, to be able to advise people, where is my cargo, where is my container. So that became, really important, and it remains important, because I've run events for about 30 years where cargo owners, supply chain managers have stood up and said, can I please just get some information on where my container shipment is? It's a black hole out there. And that world is not gone, but diminishing. And logistics actors see the chance to get new revenue. We look at something like, it's a big example, but the Suez Canal, the ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal made global headlines. They estimated that just that one incident, given the scale of ships today, cost the global economy between $6 and $10 billion a day in lost trade.
A day?
A day, yeah.
Okay.
So, we are talking about sort of big risks, known shocks and unknown shocks. Digitalization is crucial to help, get that visibility, and I'm just as passionate about it as Wolfgang, was, and digitalization and collaboration, absolutely. On your point too on security, the real massive problem historically is that no one wanted to, confess to having had a cyber attack. Reputational damage was too big, so there was very little information, hard information, sort of a culture of silence. That is changing. But there's still a way to go, because that is that issue of reputational risk. But so, to Wolfgang's point, collaboration and information sharing on cyber risks, risk mitigation and cyber attacks, that's critical, and it is starting to happen. And that's within the logistics sector and the transport sector, but also between the private and public sectors, as I think past speakers also referred to. Just to quote someone recently who's from a very big sort of logistics provider, he said, if we are not sharing, we are making the dark forces more powerful. We will all be cyber victims. But I think, again, as was referred to in the last session, regulations will play a part, the enforcement and the protocols and the not just guidelines, but regulations. So I wanted to mention, those who didn't know, there's a new EU directive out. There'll be new laws coming in place next year in the EU that will regulate major parts of transport and logistics industry. They'll have to meet new standards for cybersecurity, and they'll have to also meet new standards for reporting of cybersecurity attacks. So, the regulator and government, they do play a big part, and that's actually been welcomed by actors like Port of Rotterdam, which, as Susan was talking about, is critical infrastructure, nationally and to world trade, and they've said that they would welcome having, the regulator on board. So cyber, it's growing, and you know, it will continue to do so. If I may just, if I've got time, I read a great article that's from a consultancy company that's in maritime, mainly, but on cybersecurity, and that just to sort of say what's happening in the logistics sector, it is happening, it does happen, is, you know, we've got different actors at play here. We've got organised crime, opportunists, and if I can give a couple of case points, Port of Antwerp, you know, major gateway for international supply chains and trade into and out of Northern Europe. In 2011, their operating system, their port terminal operating system was hacked. And a group by organised crime group who lay low, but they hacked it and nobody noticed, and they used the data they had to identify containers on their port terminal that had a contraband inside, drugs mainly. And what they were doing was sending people into the port with all that information and opening the containers, which were fully loaded with legitimate cargo, extracting the drugs, closing the container and disappearing off. And nobody noticed for a while because the container shipment was still there and got delivered to the consignee. But that's the physical and the digital together. Then we've got nation states and hostile actors. Port of Los Angeles last year reported to the BBC that they had last year 14, let me just check I've got my data right here, 40 million cyber attacks per month on the Port of Los Angeles. And they know that because of something we'll talk about later. But they said, you know, because it's the biggest gateway for cargo and supply chains sort of on the planet still, I think. But what they said about the latest ones is they've identified the threats were coming from Russia and other countries. And they're now working with the FBI. So this becomes a matter of national security, not just supply chain or logistics security. So then, you know, also the hostile actors, you know, logistics industry becomes collateral damage. I'm sure everyone listening will remember the NotPetya attack. It was back a few years ago. It was one of what they call, you know, wiper attacks that was set out to destroy files, and it was from a hostile state. But Maersk Line, FedEx, and Mondelez, the big US food manufacturer, were all impacted. And they said they estimate the total cost for recovery from those three companies was about $800 million. And back to how you have a backup plan, as they were talking about in terms of risk mitigation, Maersk said at the time that if it hadn't been for WhatsApp, they wouldn't have been able to function because the team switched on to WhatsApp, and are not advertising for that particular brand. And again, to the point of your speakers in the last session, next category is unintentional and intentional insiders, people. You know, have
human
access.
error, you can't, that's always going to be an issue.
Well, it's a mix. It's both human error, you're absolutely right, but certainly in the logistics sector, where drug smuggling is growing exponentially because containers are convenient, and it's becoming a flood now. Organised crime is very effective, but there's been coercion, you know, people have been put at threat and risk, you know, and so people have sometimes, there's human error, and sometimes people are doing stuff because they're being forced to by somebody external. So, but human error is still probably one of the biggest, you know, sort of cause or door opening to the issue. So talking to some people before this session, you know, that what we reveal is, you know, there's still a lot of disconnects across the industry. This is a global industry, same as, you know, we have a digital divide between some nations and others in terms of access to the technologies we are talking about. So cybersecurity sort of expectations and reality aren't always matching up. And in many cases, you know, just to try and speak truth, as I've been told it. Cyber risks and cyber risk management efforts are lacking. Not those who know, but as a not, they always say the chain is as strong as the weakest link. There's still a lot of education and as Wolfgang was saying, work to be done on awareness raising. But if I may, just to finish this section up, to pass this in a different light, I was looking through this new EU directive, which is pretty stringent, and that's good. But as part of it, the directive says, which I think turns things on its head in terms of how we think about cybersecurity, because I think, tends to be thought of a bit negatively. Oh, it's another thing I've got to manage when I'm already really busy. The EU directive said, I quote, cybersecurity is a key enabler for many critical sectors, that would include logistics, to successfully embrace digital transformation and to fully grasp economic, social, sustainability benefits. So, I mean, I think that's quite a good way of looking at it. Put cyber first, put security first. Don't make it something that people don't want to talk about. Make it, as the last panel said, get it to the point where it's a holistic part of digitalization and isn't an afterthought or something people don't want to talk about.
All right, and to touch upon what you just said just a while back about we're not as strong, we're as strong as our weakest link. I think that's really, really important, because it doesn't matter if you're just given the technology. You got to learn how to safeguard. You got to learn how to protect yourself, because it can be used against you. But a lot of places, a lot of regions don't really have that, even though they're given the technology.
That's absolutely true. And as Wolfgang said, I'm definitely one for collaboration, because there's so many links in the chain and so many handoffs in logistics that it can only bring benefits of sort of knowledge and efficiency, but mapping that chain and reaching out to sort of is crucial. And not everyone has, remember, there's a lot of massive multi-global actors in logistics, but there's also a lot of small SME enterprises around the world that are playing a part in the chain. So looking for those potential vulnerabilities and whether it's on the digital side or on the company side, there's in the supplier network is clearly critical to the logistics performance, but also then the larger supply chain performance.
All right, thank you, Rachel. I think we'll move on to the next question. So I'm going to throw a stat at you. So a Gartner survey revealed that 82% of CEOs in logistics industries plan to increase investments in digital capabilities across the enterprise. So the industry is rapidly evolving. There is a growing interest in digitalization. So in digitizing logistics execution to improve efficiency and effectiveness. So talking about digital solutions, or in this case SaaS solutions, where does the adoption of security tools stand among the latest trends or latest priorities, and what do you think, or in your opinion, would be the best tools for that kind of security?
I kind of again have to echo Wolfgang that because it's a chain, the collaborative piece is crucial. But what we can see is, and there's still a real lack of awareness or lack of willingness to talk in certain areas. But, what we can see is there is definitely a rise in, professional cybersecurity services and consultancies. They've seen them coming up. They often come out of the defense sector or other sectors, but they've come into the logistics sector. So they're bringing that sort of expertise and knowledge with them, and tools, control towers. So everything the speakers in the last session were talking about, sort of having an eye, constant monitoring. So we're definitely seeing that. If I look at someone like the Port of Los Angeles that we mentioned in the last segment, they kind of stand out as an example of where, the industry might go. They've got their cyber operation security which works within part of the FBI network. But they've also invested millions of dollars in the cyber resilience sector. And that center's managed, 24 hours a day, and it's a watch. As we're saying, it's a watchtower. I'm not saying everyone's going to go out and do that, because Port of Los Angeles, is sort of nationally managing a lot of cargo. Let's put it that way. But as the past panel said as well, training, education, technology, awareness raising, they all form part of that toolkit, and as they say, it is from the C-suite down. So that process of talking and communicating is very, very important. I think the big actors who are really embracing digitalization as part of the logistics integrator move, they're really on top of this. But there's a whole, like I said, there's a whole heap of chain out there where the awareness might not be there, the resources might not be there, to always do what's best, even if they want to.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely, awareness is growing, and there's still a lot of work to do.
All right. Thank you for that, Rachel. We are a little pressed for time, so I think we got one more question left. And all right, so I'll shoot it. So, is it probable that the logistics industry will embrace evolving times? And I think we've addressed this probably kind of like leading up to this stage. So, is it probable that the industry will embrace the evolving times and kind of adapt to the changing cybersecurity demands? Because considering the utilization of endpoint security and management tools such as at least unified endpoint management tools that kind of facilitate real-time tracking, visibility of shipments, as well as endpoint and device management. Additionally, with the implement of you got new strategies today, security strategies such as zero trust and other network security practices, where overall supply chain it's kind of strengthened. How fast or how efficiently do you think the industry can adapt?
I think it's all coming down the line, because like everywhere in the world, logistics industry is awash with connected mobile devices and endpoints. But that also includes all of the IoT technology, which is vital for visibility in the chain, but it's also providing that foundational data that Susan mentioned through sensors and telematics that will feed future, predictive analytics and AI and machine learning. So they're everywhere, or getting everywhere. So, device management and what the systems you mentioned, yes, because the hardware itself, a sensor or, or a mobile phone, that's not where the, that's not where the real deal lies. It's the software, and the intelligence behind. So you definitely would say that, zero trust as a sort of philosophy, and the cyber security element of, unified endpoint management and mobile device management will be definitely embraced. And it already is, because some of the OEMs to the industry have a stack, and security is built into that. Doesn't mean there's no risks, but there's a means. And I think this is the perfect solution. Some of the things you're talking about will absolutely be needed. If you've got hundreds of thousands of containers with telematics devices and sensors on, you definitely need a central management solution for operational efficiency, but also, security at the same time.
It's kind of like a good starting point at the very least.
Yes, yes, it is. And as I said, there is a lot of work, I think, Wolfgang and others to do still to raise awareness. What we are definitely seeing is industry bodies who are coming together to collaborate within their community and across the aisle with other industry bodies to look at policy, awareness, education and training, and to interact with the regulators. So there will be a lot more out there that's very much focused on the logistics sector and the components of logistics, transport segment as well. So I do think we need to continue that work, because digitalization, collaboration, and security might be, to add one word to what Wolfgang said, might be the new mantra. There's a lot of opportunity for people, I think, in the security space within the logistics sector in the future as well.
I think we're going to just have to wait and see how that goes, because again,
Yeah.
like you said, the landscape just keeps on changing.
Yeah, it does, and nobody can manage that at any scale without digital tools. And digital tools have vulnerabilities, therefore cyber risk management and security is just essential to actually, as the EU said, be able to embrace the challenges of digitalization.
All right. And I think you've made you've made good on your promise to quote Wolfgang.
Yeah, well, he and I were working together a few years ago, and so I'm not surprised.
That's great. And I think, fortunately, this discussion or this interview might have to come to an end. And before you go, I'm really sorry. Before you go, Rachel, I've been speaking a lot, so kind of slip of the tongue. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for taking the time off to attend this interview, for informing our viewers on LinkedIn, and you had so much to say. And thank you. It was a really engaging discussion, at least for me. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. I hope to have added a bit of value. And
oh, definitely.
Thank you for the invite, and thank you everyone who listened in. And you can reach me on LinkedIn if you've got any more questions. I've got some data points and research sources that I'd be happy to share with anybody.
All right. And to the viewers, thank you so much for attending Hexnode, this edition of Hexnode Live. And if you guys have missed it, you can check it. This is going to be uploaded on our website very soon. So you can go onto our events page and check it out. It's going to be on there on demand very soon. And yeah, I guess that's about it. So to all our viewers, thank you. To all the speakers, to all the panelists who attended, thank you so much. And good afternoon, good evening, and good night. So yeah, thank you and bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.